All right, it's overcast. It's my favorite kind of weather. Okay, guys. So I got a question here in the comments from somebody called Brohemid32. It says, is there a particular video that explains how drugs entered your orbit and ultimately took over? I've kind of been watching out of order and haven't seen this subject. Thank you, Brohemid32, for your comment. So I found this kind of like an interesting question just because of what I think the answer is for me. So I'm going to talk about that, but also my relationship to drugs generally and my relationship to individual drugs and how that differs. But real quick, if you're new here, I'm Brian. I was once a trauma ICU RN, then became a full-time heroin and meth addict. I was arrested for selling drugs, sentenced to 3 to 10 years in prison. I'm currently serving out the rest of that 3 to 10 year sentence on house arrest. I have my ankle monitor on right now. This channel is just a way for me to share with you what I've learned after having lived an addicted life, as well as how I'm moving forward and rebuilding my life from scratch. So welcome. All right, so here's the thing, Brohemid32. Drugs entered my orbit, I imagine, very similarly to how drugs enter most people's orbit. I don't think there was any special case of exposure with me that made me get into it. In fact, quite the opposite. The first time I ever did drugs was alcohol in high school. It was probably like around my senior year of high school, actually. I had a job at a Chevron gas station, and it was it was like, well, I mean, I don't know. I think it was just, they created a position for me and my friends so that we could like just have a job, I think. Basically, we just washed people's windows when they stopped to get their gas, and we like restocked things in the coolers and shit. But one day, my friend and I decided we were gonna try getting drunk, and so we went into the back and we took a bunch of the Smirnoff Ice and just chugged them. It took turns going back and like keeping guard and drinking the Smirnoff Ice in the freezer. And then we both got like, after we felt like we had enough, we like, okay, we're going on our lunch, and we just walked out. And I just remember feeling like, ooh, but it wasn't that eventful of a experience, I don't think. The second thing I did was marijuana, and that was a lot more interesting to me. I was on a trip on spring break or something, I think, with another friend, and we drove down to UCLA because our friend who had just graduated the year before was going to UCLA, and we stayed with him in the dorms, and that was the first time that I smoked weed, and I remember being absolutely terrified. I was so paranoid I could barely function, and I remember we just were hanging out, and I like couldn't even speak to anybody, but yet I was still like interested in what was happening. I was like, this is crazy. And I remember we ate a burger, and that was like the highlight. I was like, this is the most amazing thing I've ever eaten. And I remember being back in his dorm room later and being like, we need to find another burger. Anyway, so I was going to sleep and looking at the wall and coming down, I remember, and thinking like, that was super interesting, and I definitely got to do that again. But my interest in it wasn't like, even to this day, when I look back on it, it wasn't like an addictive thing. I was just interested in how it made me feel. And this is gonna define a clear separation between problem drugs and other drugs for me. Throughout the rest of high school, it was really just weed and alcohol, I think. I don't remember if I ever tried anything beyond that. But right after high school, I moved to Isla Vista, which is like this party central area right next to UC Santa Barbara. I lived there for 2 years, and that's where I was really exposed to a smorgasbord of different drug experiences. But I don't think this was anything like out of the ordinary for that environment. I tried cocaine, which I was always very uninterested in. MDMA or ecstasy was a very profound experience for me. I mean, still to this day, I consider my experiences with MDMA to be some of the more profound and important of my life. I can say the same for my experiences with LSD. They have been just transformative in my view of the world and my view on my life. In fact, later on, when I would get heavily addicted to opiates, my experiences with LSD in that state were like so moving that they, you know, catalyzed my most aggressive attempts to get off of the opiates. Anyway, all that's just to say that my attraction to certain substances, I think, even to this day when I look back on it, were actually wholesome and born of a desire to expand my psychological and spiritual horizons. And I don't regret those experiences at all, and I wouldn't take them back for anything in the world. Up to this point in my drug journey, I hadn't developed a dependence on anything. I definitely could overdo it particularly with alcohol, I would say, but there was just no like physical dependence. I could stop, whenever, and if I had to be sober, I had no problem. I didn't like need to have it in my system. That all changed when I discovered opiates in the form of, I think, Vicodin or Norco probably. When I took that drug, I liked it very much for a very different reason than I liked other things like LSD or even marijuana. There was a huge difference. Okay, and the difference is this. What excited me about drugs like MDMA and LSD was the experience that I was getting from them and the insights that I was receiving from those experiences. What excited me about opiates is that it felt like it was a solution to a problem. It felt like it helped me fix something that was wrong with me. And that makes all the difference when it comes to developing a problem attachment to a substance. The opiates felt like a cure for my lifelong struggles with inadequacy, feeling not good enough, people pleasing, my feelings of imposter syndrome, of not belonging, social anxiety, feelings of depression that I didn't even know that I had. Opiates felt like a magic solution to all of that. So when I got exposed to opiates, I quickly got attached in a way that was very problematic. And to go back to Brohemed32's question, opiates entered my orbit the same way that everything else did, just kind of circumstantially, being in a party town, being in a college environment. But once I crossed paths with them, they did not have to continue to enter my orbit. I sought them out actively after that. In fact, I never knew anyone who did heroin or was into that at all. I, by myself, this was after I moved out of Isla Vista. I was not in a party environment anymore. I actively went out looking for it, even though I didn't know anybody who had it or did it. I literally would go to the worst parts of town wherever I was living and walk around at night just trying to find someone who I could buy heroin from because I wanted to try it. The same thing happened with my ultimate attachment to meth. I tried Adderall. That's what came into my orbit when I was in the Isla Vista party situation. Adderall crossed my path, and the first time I took it, I was like, this is a solution to a problem. This fixes all my issues with just not being able to concentrate, being so distracted, not being interested in anything, doing horrible in school, all these things that I felt were wrong with me. From way before I ever discovered this, I was always like, my parents were always mad at me because I wasn't doing good in school, and I never felt like I could really concentrate and pay attention. Even when I tried, I felt like I couldn't absorb the information. So then the first time I tried Adderall, I was like, this stuff is amazing. And as soon as I learned that meth is basically Adderall, I, by myself, without knowing anybody who did it ever, found it, went out and found it the same way I found heroin. On the streets because I wanted to try it, because I wanted to do it. I mean, obviously I knew better. I didn't actually think that heroin and meth were a real solution to my problems, but that is the attachment that I had to it. I desired these things because I felt like it helped me feel more like myself when I was on them. Okay, so I think that kind of addresses the question. Really, it was, drugs were around me just like they were around everybody else. And I experimented with drugs, I think, like kind of everybody else was experimenting with drugs. And I definitely liked them. I definitely enjoyed the change of consciousness, and I was super interested in that. And I still am interested in that stuff. I'm definitely very interested, for example, in the way that psychedelics are being used as therapies for addicts now. It's very promising, the research and the studies that are coming out on that stuff, and that's very interesting to me. That it's something we desperately need right now because addiction is a huge problem of all kinds. We are living in an addicted culture, and we need solutions, and the ones that we have are very poor at this point, and these ones are looking very promising. So I'm very interested in that. But it wasn't until I came across substances that I experienced as a kind of band-aid to deeper issues, you know, right? Like, while the other ones were giving me these experiences and insights, these I was experiencing as a band-aid to my deeper issues. It was once I ran into those substances that I really started to, you know, just seek them out habitually and compulsively at the expense of everything else in my life. I think the lesson that I learned from this that I've carried through to today, that I think anybody could apply to, you know, anything in their life, is this practice of taking inventory of everything that you kind of habitually do in your day-to-day life, like what you're filling your day-to-day life with, and then look at each thing and say, okay, is this something that is helping me learn, opening my mind to things, making me move forward, or is this something that I'm using as a band-aid for some sort of discomfort that I'm experiencing? That's just what I do today now. I look at everything and I'm like, is this helping me grow? Is this being used as a crutch? And I evaluate each thing that way, and then I decide what to do about it from there. And speaking of that, coming up here in the next couple weeks, I'm going to be talking a little bit more about some things that I'm going to be implementing into my daily routine as I get closer to this ankle monitor coming off. I'm going to get into some real intense personal work, you know, before it comes off, hopefully. I still haven't found out for sure yet if it's coming off in September, but I'll talk more about that later though. The song of the week is Earth, Wind and Fire's cover of the classic Beatles song, Got to Get You Into My Life. I had never heard this before, but my friend Jeff turned me on to it, and it's so dope. There's actually a lot of other songs that Jeff's been recommending that are so cool, and they all deserve a slot on here, but I'm gonna go with this one for this week. Such a cool arrangement, such a cool version of the song. I've never heard it before. So thank you, Jeff, for that. Everybody else, check it out if you haven't heard it already. All right, take care of yourselves this week, and I'll see you on the next one.